Torah, I thought, this is the very opposite of what I would like my yeshiva to be. So, I'm just mentioning that derech hagav, by the way. Somebody had mentioned to me that perhaps Gush would be the best yeshiva for me. South Africans who were studying in Israel at the time, and I'd come from South Africa, within the religious Zionist world, went to Keren Yavne. And at that time, there were no South Africans in Gush. Gush had started in 1969, first in Paris, then it moved to Alon Shkut. This was 1976. The Beit Midrash was still at the bottom of the hills where the Summit offices now are. In 1976, the new Beit Midrash was still under construction. And I came to Gush to spend a day there, to taste it. I don't know what the occasion was, but there was an event in the Chadarochel, and Rav Lichtenstein spoke at it. And during his sikha, he mentioned, somebody told me about a Dvar Torah for Parshat Noach. Now this was Elul, the Dvar Torah for Parshat Noach, in which it had been suggested that a yeshiva equals Teva Noach, and he repeats this Dvar Torah. And then he said, this is exactly what a yeshiva is not. Chas v'shalom, that we can describe the world out there as being a place of outright tumah with the implications, chas v'shalom, that it's worthy of destruction. Chas v'shalom, that the yeshiva should be a place that is detached from civilization. Rather, the yeshiva needs to be in the heart of our world. We need to study seriously, but at the same time, we need to be in touch, we need to engage. And people from outside society should feel comfortable to come within the walls of the yeshiva. Men, and believe it or not, women as well, which in some yeshivot is an impossibility that you might behold. And the more he was speaking, the more I was thinking to myself, Baruch Hashem, I have arrived home. But I hadn't arrived home yet because I first had to have a paher with Rav Aharon. And I recall it well, it was on Masechet Shavuot, which at the time I was studying. And Baruch Hashem, I was accepted into the yeshiva, and I commenced my studies immediately after Sukkot of that year. And I, for 2 years, studied in Rav Aharon's shiur, and it was an enormous zechut. I owe to him my own derech in Talmudic study, the Brisker Shita. What I didn't know at the time was that through him, I was studying a way to approach all dilemmas and challenges in life. And this is how I operate to this day and encourage others to operate. To be fair-minded, to try one's best to be objective, even when emotion is running high. To evaluate a situation based on the various options that face you. To weigh up each option, the Brisker Shita, and to work out what is the best way forward based on rational consideration. And as a result, I often hark back to those days sitting in his class when I'm confronted with testing situations. Baruch Hashem, I learned a lot from him in terms of substance and Talmudic study, through his sichot, particularly his sichot on the Perush HaRamban, Ala Torah, and many other sichot, but most of all, I learned Mehalifotov, just by watching the man. You know, when it comes to the fact that we follow Hillel and not Shammai, of course, we are aware of the different shitot of Hillel and Shammai. One was Mekel, the other was Machmir, in a general sense. But the Talmud tells us that most of all, we follow Hillel because he was an outstanding role model. He was an ish chesed. He was a person whose patience was tested, and yet he was there for everyone. And so too with Rav Aharon. He was a man who was naturally my Rav because of the person he was. And when you're studying in yeshiva, it's a very close, small world. You look at everything under a microscope. And when you view your Rav and your Rosh Yeshiva, they're under that microscope. And you tend to notice everything, or everything that you're able to notice. And under that microscopic study, Rav Aharon was just the most remarkable, supernatural person for me. I don't believe I'll ever come across a genius in any way close to the genius that he was, and at the same time, he was simply Anav Mikol Adam. Genuinely modest, But just like Moshe Rabbeinu, who was Anav Mikol Adam, when it came to issues on which he passionately felt that he needed to make a stand, this shy man became a roaring lion, crying out about what he believed to be unjust, what he believed to be wrong, and being a leader from the front on many a controversial issue. Through my days in yeshiva, I consulted with him a lot. And then from time to time after I left the yeshiva, I would consult with him. And most recently, at a time when I was in a shortlist to become Chief Rabbi, and I thought it might be possible, if not probable, on a visit to Israel, I arranged to meet him. At that time, his health was somewhat failing, but I had a very precious 90 minutes with him. And I will always remember that very, very precious time. And like always, when you were with him, you were exclusively the only thing in his thoughts. He was a man of deep integrity, and that shone through when I put to him certain dilemmas I had, or situations. He didn't have time for politics within the world of the rabbinate and within religious life. He detested those who dragged our world into Chilul Hashem's situations, and he stood up to be countered when such situations arose. And I will always have hakarat hatov to him for the guidance that he gave me, certain issues which now are playing out in my own rabbanut, and not only the specific guidance he gave, but also his derech, to try to understand the issue, to be as open-minded and as fair-minded as possible, and to be there to give genuine advice, and at the same time, not to give advice with a tone of, I'm your Rebbe, this is what you must do, but rather, la'aniyut dati, this is what I think should be the situation. A real outstanding gadol in every possible sense of the word. I got to know that Rav Aharon was not just a man with an incredible head. In the yeshiva at the time, people would say, with regard to the yeshiva, Rav Amital Zatzal was the heart of the yeshiva, Rav Aharon Zatzal was the head of the yeshiva. But actually, Rav Amital was an incredible Gaon, and Rav Lichtenstein was an amazing man of heart. And the more you got to know him, the more you appreciated that. Great passion, wonderful emotion, a man of deep feeling. So, for example, I recall a sikha that he once gave on a Friday night. He was troubled by the fact that Zmirot on the Shabbos table did not have sufficient ruach according to his liking. So this is what he said. He said that Yeshivat HaKotel was looking for a Rosh Yeshiva, and they wanted to appoint him. He visited Israel, Rav Amital spoke to him, and wanted him to come to Alei Tzion, to the Gush. And he needed to weigh up which yeshiva he would decide to be the Rosh Yeshiva of. He said, I spent a Shabbat at Gush, the Zmirot at the Shabbos table were just incredible. That's why I decided to come to this yeshiva, because of the Ruach here. Something which possibly is not well known. I was zocher to hear that sikha of his and for him to reveal these facts. And certainly, there was a man of incredible mind, but who had a wonderful heart. Somebody who felt Ruach and who wanted us to enjoy the Ruchaniyot of the yeshiva together with the power of study and of learning. So, on his demise, there are so many things which we can learn, and what I find to be so precious is the extent of his mark and his impact right around the Jewish world. Wherever I am, I come across people who hold him up as being their Rav, their leader, somebody who is an outstanding role model in every possible way. Coming back to Sefer Breshit, rather than Parshat Noach being for me an example of how to lead our lives, I believe that the most predominant text that we should be following is those passages relating to Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef is the only person called by Chazal HaTzadik. Yes, Noach is Tzadik, Yov and others, but called by Chazal Tzadik, only Yosef. And interestingly enough, Yosef was more than any one of the predominant characters of Chumash, a person who engaged with the outside world, who was a player within that outside world, in fact, who came to be at the top of the outside world. Why Dafka was he Hatzadik? Because of his background in learning, the fact that he had grown up in his father's house, that to this day we consider what was the final teaching, Egla Rufa, etc., etc. His whole life was centered around learning, and thanks to the learning and the personal example that he had from his father, he was able in testing times in the outside world to be a shining example, to bring the brilliance and the value of his learning to impact positively on the world and not for the opposite to occur. That was the way of Rav Aharon Lichtenstein. Somebody who inspired all of us to be imbued with learning, to appreciate the value of learning, that every single second counts, and who disliked waste of any kind, and at the same time wanted people through their learning to be engaged with the world in order that we should be, in whatever capacity we undertake in our professional lives and careers, an outstanding model for others to follow through our Torah, impacting positively on others. My concluding thought relates to something which I learned about him in his death. So last year, I rushed to be at his Levaya, which I was privileged to be at, and I think the Levaya in the yeshiva sent out a very strong statement. The Levaya of a Rosh Yeshiva, who gives the Hespedim? And if there are 7 or 8 Hespedim, you would expect other Rashi Yeshiva, Gedolei Hador. The people who gave the Hespedim were his children. And they spoke about him as a father, as a family man. And that was so powerful for me. Because what he taught was that family comes first. And my images of him will always be of himself and Rabbi Nitova and the family sitting around the table at the top while there were the rows of tables for Shabbat meals. During my 2 years at the yeshiva, we stepped up standards for the opening of the new Beit Midrash, and I think it was his son Meir's bar mitzvah that we celebrated at that time, and his father, Rav Lichtenstein from Paris, was there and gave a wonderful Torah, which I recall very vividly, and it was Rav Aharon, the family man. You know, while the whole world talks about his divrei Torah and his this and his that, at the end of the day, what mattered most to him was his mishpacha. What an important message that is for all of us, regardless of what we do in life and how noble a task we might have out in public life. What matters most of all is what kind of a husband we are, what kind of a father, what kind of a spouse, what kind of a grandfather, child, sibling. Our families do come first. And through our families, we aspire to have an even deeper impact on our surroundings. So thank you for enabling me to offer these brief thoughts of a man who I have been privileged to know, who made a deep impact on my life, and through whose zechut, I hope I will always, together with so many others, including yourselves and thousands around the world, to spread his Torah and to spread his goodness, the greatness of his mind and the greatness of his heart through this incredible person that we were zocher to know, to revere, to love, and to never to forget. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
Thanks on behalf of everybody to the Chief Rabbi for taking the time to be with us this evening and inspiring us with those very heartfelt words. So it seems a little bit incongruous after what we've heard from Rav Rimon and what we've heard from Rabbi Mirvis, and also the way we know Rav Aharon ourselves, his humility, to find that he's the star of a video presentation, but I guess that's the way the world is nowadays. And we continue with a brief video presentation about the life of Rav Aharon.
אני חושב שזו זכות תמיד ללמוד מדורם לדרבן. אני חושב שהייתי יכול לעשות כמה דברים אחרים, ולפרנס את ביתי בצורה יפה, דברים שהייתי מעלה. אבל אם אני מחפש משהו שחשוב מבחינת תוכן, או משהו שאני רואה בו אתגר, ואתגר שמשמח ומרענן, אין דבר עליה דבר שהייתי מעדיף לעשות.
To invite the distinguished Torah scholar to come and serve as head of the yeshiva in Gush Etzion. And if we are allowing ourselves to ask you to assume the position of head of a yeshiva which is taking its first steps, it is only due to the great pioneering challenge which we envision in the building of this yeshiva. In 1971, in response to Harav Amital's request, he joined him as co-Rosh Yeshiva and made Aliyah with his family.
What I'm frequently asked, is there the shiur Harav Tzion which attracted you? I can answer very briefly. An inspiration and a challenge.
Rav Lichtenstein בא לפני 32 שנה, אבל הייתה לו חוכמת בריאת הנולד, שאם הוא יבוא לישיבה הזאת, לישיבה משהו מיוחד בו. קודם כל גדלתי בבריאת הנולד, שבראיתי ב-32 שנה שביתי ישיבת הרצון. מי שרוצה לדעת את התשובה, ראיתי את רב המקרא.
To be a Talmud of Harav Lichtenstein is to strive for maximum achievement in all areas of life. It is to see the aspiration for greatness in Torah as the responsibility of each individual and to strive for the joy of Torah.
אני זוכר כשהגעתי לישיבה, הייתי נער בן 18, קצת התחלתי להכיר את הרב ליכטנשטיין, אני זוכר את עצמי חושב בליבי, לא העליתי על דעתי כשעוד יש בעולם אנשים כאלה. הרב ליכטנשטיין היה נדמה אז בעיניי כאחד הענקים שנימק עדן.
אתה יושב בשיעור שלו ואתה יושב עם אחד מחכמי המסורה. זה לא דבר קטן.
We strive on the one hand to stimulate the personal growth, moral, religious, spiritual, intellectual, of individual students, to enable them, if not to become Moshe Rabbeinus, at least to maximize the utilization of their own potential, to become the best person, Jew, Talmid Chacham and Yerei Shomayim, scholar, servant of God, that they can be.
There's a long tradition of Jewish history. It started at Har Sinai and it continues today. And I have absolute confidence and feel deeply that, for me personally, that link runs through Lichtenstein. He is what connects me with the Torah that Moshe received at Har Sinai. And at the same time, I feel incredible responsibility.
Ours is the generation following Moshe Rabbeinu, Knesset Yisrael, emerging from Mitzrayim, from Egypt. Ours is the generation of a new exodus and of a fresh entry.
To be a Talmud of Harav Lichtenstein is to assume responsibility for my surroundings, my family, society, the Jewish people, the state of Israel.
הרב ליכטנשטיין נתן מימד מוסרי לתפיסה הכוללת של ישיבת הרי ציון, של ישיבות ההסדר, של הציבור הדתי בארץ. ומאז ועד היום תרומתו לציבור הדתי בארץ היא רבת ממדים.
בית תורה בארץ ישראל, זה ליישב אותה, תרצו לייהד אותה, לקדש אותה.
To be a Talmud of Harav Lichtenstein is to see the human experience itself, the handiwork of the Almighty, and through a balance between various emotional and other needs, to create a personality that aspires to merge all aspects of life, a pure and deep religious experience from the perspective of rejoicing trembling.
להיות תלמיד של הרב ליכטנשטיין זה להתפעל, להתרשם, לנסות להידבק בהליכותיו, במידותיו, בענוותנותו הגדולה, בצניעותו. זה מגיע לדברים קטנים של ריקודים בחתונה, שהיא מצווה לשמח חתן וכלה, אז לא מפסיקים לרקוד.
To be a Talmud of Harav Lichtenstein is to consent to live in two worlds.
אני חי בשני עולמות, עולם של קדושת סופה, עולם של נקודות תכנים של חולין, אבל חולין גם כן שמתחברת עם קדושה, מועילה למי שמחפש ומעוניין בכך להבנת יתר, לדירוג קצת נוסף בהבנת עולם הקודש, כשאתה מסתכל דרך הספגריה של עולם הקודש. אחד הדברים שלמדתי ברבותיי בבית בריסק, כל ניסוי אינטלקטואלי, בניגוד להערכה ודאי, לשאול את השאלות הנכונות זה חלק עיקרי מרכזי במלאכה. ההצלחה זה תלוי בתלמידים, לא פחות שתלוי בי. אבל עם אנשי היחד, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור לעשות חיים, זו מסיבה שמוצאת על כתפי שנינו. נקווה שכל ברוך ייתן את חלקו, תצא בליבנו.
It's my task to introduce Rav Bick Ramin Yeshiva. You're not here to listen to me, you're here to hear Rav Bick, but I just want to share with you one quick story. I'm the smallest of all speakers tonight. Zachiti, I had the merit of learning in the shiur of Rav Lichtenstein for 3 years. During my 7 years of yeshiva, and he made me who I am. There's no doubt in my mind. I get very emotional because the Yirat Shamayim, the derech in Rabbanut, the derech in learning of Halacha, the derech in learning of Gemara, the derech in learning of Hashkofa, is certainly shayach completely and solely to him. And when I came to the yeshiva, I'm just going to quickly tell you just one story that I think embodies. And I remembered it last night. With Rav Rimon, we finished davening in Shul, Mitzvah Shabbat, and we went out to make Kiddush Levana. And I remember that as a young Bachur, I was not going to go to Yeshivat Alei Tzion. I was going to attend a Haredi yeshiva because I come from a Chamur Haredi background. But a friend of mine was studying at Yeshivat Alei Tzion, slightly older than I, and I went for Shavuot to the yeshiva. And I was very inspired, and I remember the shiurim that were given, and they were very inspiring. But after Shavuot, there was Kiddush Levana. And Rav Lichtenstein, everyone went out to make Kiddush Levana outside. Rav Lichtenstein turned to me, and he turned around and he goes, Shalom Aleichem. And he turned around to me and said, Shalom Aleichem. Taken back, and I said, Aleichem Shalom. And afterwards, someone came up to me and said, wow, it's amazing. years later, mamash years later, we're talking about, that must have been in 1991. In 1996, I came to the Rav, to the Rosh Yeshiva, to ask for a recommendation. I was starting to look for positions. I wanted a recommendation. And he wrote me the most beautiful recommendation. I'm sure, he was he always saw the good in everything. And only wrote good things. And he wrote the most beautiful, really, I think probably I only got the job because of that recommendation. And he signed at the bottom, Aharon Lichtenstein, and in brackets, Rosh Yeshiva. It was handwritten. At the bottom, very far down, shows his humility. And he gave it to me, he handed it to me, and he said to me the following thing. He said to me, we've come a long way from that first Shalom Aleichem. And I was astounded because people thought, and there was a type of impression that perhaps Rav Aharon, Rav Lichtenstein, Rosh Yeshiva didn't notice things like that. And it's just not true. He did notice. He noticed every detail. He noticed everything. He knew exactly what I was up to throughout all the years at Yeshiva. And that touched me more than anything. And I remember at that time also that we were already married, and maybe just to shoot one more story, very brief. Very, very brief. When this partnership between Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Amital was incredible. And we, Baruch Hashem, we were going to get married. We were very young. We were 19. And we decided I wanted to discuss, what does the yeshiva bacher do when you go to discuss it with your Rosh Yeshiva. So, Avi remembers. I went and I sat down with Rav Lichtenstein and I pulled my heart out and I said, listen, I'm 19 and we want to get married. And he looked at me incredulously, incredulously. And he said to me, I don't understand these things. Go speak to Rav Amital. And I went to Rav Amital and Baruch Hashem got married, and it was the year that Rav Amital encouraged it. It was the year during which Rav Soloveitchik was niftar, and he was an avel. He conducted himself as an avel in every way, and he came to me, asked me to come to him. He sent a message, pleased to see the Rosh Yeshiva. I came to him, what did I do wrong? And he said to me, no, I'm not able to be at the Chatuna because I wanted to wish you a Mazal Tov. And I thought that, just that attention to detail, he didn't have to do that. The fact that he did it, everything about him was in the context of an Eved Hashem. Yirat Shamayim, I learned from Rav Lichtenstein in every way. And even in Rabbanut, there have been things that I have faced, challenges that I have faced. How do I approach? What do I do? Especially as a modern Orthodox rabbi. And his absolute dedication and clarity in Messiah was unquestionable. And he insisted on, from all his Talmudim, clarity in Messiah, clarity in observance, and clarity in commitment to Torah. And that's something that the whole yeshiva embodied. And Baruch Hashem, tonight we have with us Harav Rimon and Harav Bick. And Harav Bick is a long time Ram in the yeshiva, and he can tell you much more than I can. And I'm quite excited to hear what Harav Bick, an enormous Talmud Chochem, Talmid of Harav Lichtenstein in every way, has to tell us. Harav Bick, it's an honor to please have you with us.
The basic structure of what I wanted to say has just been destroyed. I'll explain why. I'll do it anyhow. It's too late to change. There's a habit which has been based in a number of the stories told this evening, and in many other circumstances displayed in the Mezi Ganon, that the stories or the incidents told have the following form. Despite what you might have thought about Rav Lichtenstein, in honor of Lichtenstein's greatness in A, B, and C, he was amazingly enough also good in something else. And frankly, I have a number of stories which go along the same path. But every time these stories are told, I said, and it happened to me this evening as well, I'm saying, oh, it's true. It doesn't surprise me. And it doesn't surprise me because I know that they're there. And I'm going to try to explain in some way why it doesn't surprise me. The fact that we normally think that if you're a great intellectual, you're incapable of having an emotional, not experience, but an understanding and appreciation of something, I understand why that's surprising to us. Plus, but as long as I've known Rav Lichtenstein, it wasn't, although, it was a certain wholeness. So none of these stories surprised me. I have to say the first story you told me surprised me. And therefore, there goes my vote about the uniqueness. In fact, he told you that he'd never say Shem Aleichem to you at Kiddush L'Chana. I don't know where that comes from. Okay, so I checked one up. You've knocked me off. Okay? And I have a purpose in what I want to do. It's normal, and it's easy to do with Rav Lichtenstein, to speak about how unusual a person he was, what a God he was. It's not hard to do. I can do it relatively easily. And I don't want to do it because, aside from the fact that he was genuinely a God Israel, and as you know, and I say this not out of cynicism, but as you know, Gdolei Yisrael at the time doesn't believe. Anyone who has a beard longer than mine has probably been called a Gdolei Yisrael. Many years ago in Yeshiva, and we noticed boys would get married, and they asked the Rosh Yeshiva to come to the wedding. Rav Lichtenstein at the time, I think he stopped after us, it was during the period after 10 years or so after Melchet Yom Kippurim, the price of gasoline had gone up by 10 times as much after the Arab boycott and the organization of OPEC. Lichtenstein had a habit that when we went to a wedding, he told us in order to save energy, in order to save gasoline. And we noticed that the boys in Yeshiva didn't think that they should send a car or arrange for a taxi to pick them up. It was obvious that if some Rebbe from someplace was invited to his wedding, they would send an entire cavalcade to accompany him. This is Lichtenstein, and he would come. We were talking about this once, I spoke with this throughout the wedding, and we realized the reason was, now maybe a little bit cynical, the reason was because he didn't have a beard. You know that today, or the diamond doesn't. So it is true, Lichtenstein was really a God of Yisrael, and I say that not merely because I'm a Talmud, not merely because he's a God of Yisrael, and I was offered to learn in Yeshiva and to teach in Yeshiva, which had a God of Yisrael, I appreciate very much, but because it's really true, and we forget it, and even I forget it sometimes. He didn't have a beard, so you put him as being a very learned person. But he was the God of Yisrael, just like, and more so, than most of the people who were roaming around, and for some of the reasons which I'll try to explain. But, here's the but, I don't want to talk about that so much. Some of the more amazing things that I learned from him were things which everybody knew can do, and we don't do. And if I would tell you what a God of Yisrael was, you would say, that's nice, it's good to hear about God of Yisrael, and I go back to my, not a God of Yisrael, so I go back to my normal life, and none of those stories that he do. So if I told you, as we opened up, it was important that he mentioned that man knew Shas, hope you appreciated that, and you wanted for that. That doesn't in any way, you know you're not as talented, or as bright, or even have a good memory as the Lichtenstein has, and therefore you say, that's nice to hear, doesn't affect me. And Yez Hashem, I hope to someday know 6 or 7 Mishnayot by heart, and I will have done mine. But nonetheless, and I think it's not just that I could do this. Many of the things which I learned from Lichtenstein, and I will have to learn in the future, were really not that difficult at all. And they didn't arise in an obvious manner from his unusual and extraordinary qualities. So I'd like to talk about a few of those things. Some of them were in fact actually mentioned. But combinations are they're extraordinary and yet simple. My opening comment is as follows. Rav Lichtenstein had basically, aside from his talents in certain areas, which perhaps were extraordinary, he had one basic desire, aim, goal, which unified everything. He wished to be Oved Hashem. It was last week, Monday, was the Yortzeit, and Tuesday morning was Aliyah Kever. On the Matzeva, the base of Kfaz, it has his name, and then it says two words. It says Oved Hashem. The habit would be very gadol, you write as much as you can, and usually once the customer do it by the Sheikh Yevod with the names, and they had a short name, but not even 4 lines, but they even gave up on the 4 lines. It says Oved Hashem. And why is that important? Because nobody in the room can say that I can't be Oved Hashem. If you say that, you really shouldn't be in this room. Not to be Oved Hashem means you're not included in our party, you're not included in Kahal Yisrael. Everyone can be and should be and desires to be Oved Hashem. I don't think Rav Lichtenstein wanted to be anything else. The things that he did before, things that he did in actuality, simply arose from the fact that he measured what he was doing by saying, is this part of my Avodas Hashem, or is it not my part of Hashem? Now, the fact that he had amazing talents in certain areas would obligate him perhaps more, because he knew that he could know all the Shas. So then he knew that to be Oved Hashem, you have to learn all the Shas. If you don't think you can know all the Shas, then it won't happen. But many of the other things he did, simple things, part of the story to say, despite that he was a brother who did simple things, but it wasn't despite that he was a brother who did simple things. The simple things were the same Avodas Hashem as the other things he did. I'll give an example that was mentioned here. It was mentioned in the movie. So I'm not sure everybody caught. When Ami and I was talking, he said, it starts from the fact that he went to weddings, he danced at the weddings. Anybody who not danced at a wedding? All my life I've been younger than Rav Lichtenstein. You can't get over. Any place I went with him at a wedding, so he was 17 years older than me. The man went to weddings, and as long as the band played, he danced. None of us had the chutzpah to ask him why. None of us could do that. We dance a little bit, and you get tired. So you go meet shnuds, you make friends. Weddings always opportunities to see people. If they were dancing, he was dancing. But if this was a traditional discussion about Rav Yisrael, so I'd say, well, there's a Gemara that says, Kol ha'ochel, and so he was afraid, and he was a big machmus, he thought maybe he wasn't mesamech, he wasn't making the chassan as happy as could be. I'm not denying that could be that was true. It could be that he had that cheshbon. I don't think so. I think his cheshbon was that he didn't come to the wedding. Shmuz if he could do in other places. He came to the wedding to celebrate the wedding. That's what we celebrate weddings, by dancing. I should know that he ate too. He wasn't ascetic. He ate very well at the wedding. But if people are dancing, why shouldn't he be dancing? And this got to a point when he was somewhat older, where I would stop dancing because I was too old to keep dancing. And the man kept dancing until the band stopped. The band stopped. He went and he sat down and he stood. So that's a story that looks like the focus that I mentioned. Despite the fact that he knew Shas and he was thinking about it all the time, he also danced a lot. The word despite there, I never understood it as despite. As soon as I saw it, I said, no, it's a little bit unusual, but it's not unusual for him. It wasn't unusual. Of course, he goes to wedding, he does it 100%. One of the things he used to emphasize in Musaf, everybody would hear this from him, so they don't realize to what extent. He would say, no matter what you do, you have to do it the best. That's classic Musaf. So when you're learning, you should learn the best, but someone would go to university, expect them to do the best, and it's true, somebody went to play basketball, you expect them to do the best. That's a famous story. Probably many of you already heard it. Time that this was a long time ago. He was still in New York, where he stopped the game that he was playing in the middle, and turned to a person on his own team and said, you know, the way you play is immoral. The reason was because anyone who's played basketball knows this phenomenon, and the boy liked to play offense. Defense was not one of the things that he thought he should put in too much energy. Even in offense, he liked to shoot. The best was something that you have to suffer in order to eventually the ball should come to you and you can have your turn. But he thought if you play, that you have to play all out. And he played all out. It was a little dangerous to let people on the court. Whatever you do, you have to do with 100%. That was the same reason why he danced the wedding. And it was only because, it wasn't because he read some self-help book that described the importance of being honest. And it was part of the Baruch Hashem. But that, it was B'chol Dracheha Da'elu. And it took me a while until I understood it. Once I understood that, I more or less, except for your story, stopped being amazed by any story that was being told. Usually I could predict the story, and when I couldn't predict it, so the evidence said, oh, okay, that makes sense. Because that's what he did all the time. That midah is a midah that I don't see how any one of us can possibly exempt ourselves from doing. It'll be applied on a different level in each person's circumstances, but once you realize that that's the way you should live, there's no way to exempt yourself from that sort of thing. And there was a time, I'm going to tell a story now which, he wouldn't mind, so I'm going to tell it. It'll be surprising to some people who are coming in. About 20 years ago, I think it was, during the vacation. So my wife and I went to a movie. Luckily, we went to a good movie. Because sometimes we go to junkie movies. This was a good movie. And while waiting online, I got Rav Nicholson going to the movie. And I can't say I was surprised. I was taken aback. I didn't expect to have to share the movie with him. But luckily, it was a very good movie. It wasn't that good a movie, but it was a pedigree. It was Pride and Prejudice. It sounds very intellectual. And it was an okay movie to see. There are certain audiences which I couldn't tell a story like that. Say my Rosh Hashiva goes to movies in vacation. So the usual explanation is, well, a person learns hard. 11.5 months of a year, he has the right to vacation. So it actually works out in English as well. Lucas wants to get a Sikhan Yeshiva, but what one does during Chodesh, during vacation. So the word in Hebrew that's usually used is the word Levalot. Levalot, what's the exact translation of Levalot? It means to spend time. So he said Levalot is from the shorish of Belay. Belay means to be worn out. Not that you're worn out if you do it. When you do it, you wear yourself out. He said, if you're going to go during Chodesh, 3 weeks, Yeshiva kids you up. Most Yeshivot have 4 weeks in Chodesh. One of the first things he did when he came to Yeshiva was to cut off the last 2 days and the first 2 days. And it fell down to 3 weeks. For many years, we were the only Yeshiva in Israel. Not only a 2-week vacation, today there are more. But Hashem, not a lot more. You don't need 4 weeks, 3 weeks enough. But if when you have 3 weeks, it's not levalot. And actually the English word said it's not to vacate. It's not to be vacant. There's an importance to doing good things that are different from the usual things you do during the weeks, including going to see a movie. But if it's not part of your God Hashem, you shouldn't be doing it. Why in the world would you waste time that God gave you? Why would you levalot it? That's macha. Doing this, and therefore he really went over the list of his movies. I know he went to see movies because the first week I met him, I think, I was all 15 years old. He shocked me. He was doing a Sefer Tshuva in Yeshiva University. The student organization, Yeshiva University, which is the student organization of a college, had arranged for a movie to be shown on movie night of that week. The movie was Salach Shabbat. It was a movie which was more meant to be a comedy. It wasn't bad. I've seen it, and I think it's very funny and enjoyable. Rav Lichtenstein exploded. He said, give us a sikha, says you made tshuva. So a movie that's comedy about funny people in Israel. You'd understand if they had, maybe a little bit probably for this week, but understand if it would be movie-like, and then he listed 2 or 3 movies. One of which I had seen as a child, still in high school. The movie had one scene in it that when it was shown, I saw it on television, I was still very young then, I closed my eyes. I was amazed that he was recommending this movie. It's a very serious movie, The Porn Joker. It's a movie about a Holocaust survivor who runs a pawn shop in Holland. Very brave man, and has flashbacks of what happened to his wife in concentration camps, but in Holland they were all blacks, the businesses were Jewish, and the residents were black. He was a pawn broker, which means basically he was somewhat taking advantage of poor people who were wanting the last things. And that was the whole story that's being told. It was a very powerful movie. He said, no, that movie, he could see seeing that in a Sefer Tshuva. Now, there's no Havamim. We're talking about a Sefer Tshuva. The first thing he said was a Sefer Tshuva. He must be doing Tshuva. But he could see how A good movie, a movie that had a point, could even be in a session made children, he wouldn't have any objection, but just a comedy that you have to do it another time. So I knew that movies were okay. And it never occurred to me. It never occurred to me to ask him for a list of movies. He would not have given it if I never did it. But what did occur to me is that you're supposed to ask yourself, not in a deep sense, not if this movie will somehow teach you to learn better. It wasn't that kind of thing. Is it part of an extremely wide, unusually wide version of what Avodas Hashem means? When you combine a total commitment to Avodas Hashem with the sensitivity to every aspect of God's Bria, so almost anything can be included if you know why it's being included. It excludes no area of human life, including literature, including movies, including sports, which we used as an example, but many more conclusions. Lichtenstein was enamored of the statement which he assumed was historically untrue. But I imagine any student of British history is aware that the Battle of Waterloo was one of the playing fields of Beatles. I only know the statement, I heard it from him. But I assume that British students are required to memorize it at some point in their secondary education. So he said that he's fairly sure that it wasn't true, but as a fact, historical fact, but he thought that the idea that sports teaches one something which ultimately would provide a fighting spirit, the British forces fighting Napoleon, is something that he thought should be applied to learning Torah as well. I'm going to mention a few traits, and which were mentioned in the various things, and I'd like to elaborate a little bit. One is the enormous sensitivity. On the one hand, we would expect that tzaddik has sensitivity. In all honesty, there is a certain divide in the Torah world between the not intellectual sensitivity, but between the devotion, the commitment, the kanos, to learning Torah all the time, and being sensitive to human needs. The truth is, I became a Talmud Lichtenstein. I was over 50 years ago. When I met Rav Lichtenstein, he was giving a shiur, Shana Aleph, introductory shiur in Yeshiva. It was my first year in Yeshiva, and I was very impressed by the Torah. He didn't imagine that Torah could be learned on that level, and maybe you want to learn a lot from Torah, but okay, so that's a reason to stay in the shiur. But one day, 1965, and this was before the 6 Day War, Eli Wiesel had visited Russia. He actually came back and wrote a book that was called The Jewish Science. It was the first book that really made us realize that there were Jews in Russia. We knew it as a fact, but we didn't know it was a real thing. And I had relatives in Russia. I never heard anybody even talk about them in my family. And before the book was published, there was an excerpt that was published in a magazine called the Look magazine, which is a popular magazine in the United States. And there was one chapter there that was published, and he had read this chapter, and he brought it in, he read it to us out loud in Yeshiva. It was a chapter about a scene where there's an old Jew who actually has a sukkah in Soviet Russia, and a few old men are there by his sukkah, and he's giving them a little speech where he says, more or less, I don't know exactly the words, more or less, this is the last sukkah in the world, and we're the last Jews who built up the sukkah, and it's really nice, it's really wonderful, we can still be over Hashem. In another year or two, there won't be any more Yiddishkeit anymore. That was more or less the point of that scene. Now, you understand that he wasn't reading it for the first time. He had to have read it in his house before he came to read it to us. He got up and he started reading it to us, and in the middle of reading this, he choked up and was unable to complete his reading. And we sat there for a minute or two, and nothing was happening, so we got up and walked out of the room. That's when I decided I was staying. That's when I decided I was going to be a Talmud of this man. That kind of sensitivity, it's childish. Anyone who's read a sad story once will cry. You read it the second time, we're not cynical, we're adult enough, we're worldly enough, we're intellectual enough to understand that, okay, now you take a step back and he had a goal. He wanted to read it to his Talmidim so that they should understand the very important point that was being told there. It was very important to read it. And this was the second time. You're supposed to get over it the second time. It was as though it was before the first time. In a similar vein, he once said to us that he envies us. This is extraordinary. Sometimes the stories are told about how extraordinary. This one was really extraordinary. He said he envies us. It was before Rosh Hashanah. And he said, you do have an opportunity to read Paradise Lost and still be affected by it. When you've read it 37 times, and you can still lose some of its effectiveness. He meant that I'm going to be in it 5 or 6. We will only be in it the 5th time, the 6th time, so we can still really get into the passionate, beautiful pictures of the glory of God and the dangers of hell, etc. The clash of titans. I have to admit that, despite that recommendation by the Talmud, I still don't like that. He assumed I read it for the 5th time, and I was still able to really get into it, but he said 37th time, so he was counting. We begin to lose. The first 36 times, he was as moved as much as the first time he read it. Sensitivity isn't only emotional sensitivity to ethical problems. It involves a lot of other things. His ability to remain simple. That's what I'm saying. It's something that any of us can do because it's a despite point of view. Despite being a gadol, he was interested in simple things, as any one of us should be interested. It relates to sometimes to halacha, sometimes to personal problems. I went to speak to him once. I didn't. I'm sure everyone has many more stories than I do. I didn't consult him often about problems that I have. I'm not sure why, but I didn't. One time I went to speak to him about choosing the yeshiva high school for my son. My son was problematic. His son's usually young, and the question was to shoot higher than him or to shoot lower than him. And the problem was in both. And I mentioned I had an opportunity using a little bit of protection to get him into a very, very good yeshiva high school. But and he sat there and he said to me something which I wouldn't have thought of. I wouldn't have thought of because I was a father and I had ambitions, among other things, false ambitions. He said, you know, you have to be very careful, and nothing which he learned from his own children, who Baruch Hashem were very talented. He said, you have to be very careful not to put somebody into a situation who will be frustrated by his inability to be on the level that's demanded in that situation. It's a simple point. Any educator would know, perhaps. But he really didn't deal with those kind of children. His own children in yeshiva is all superior people. And I said, my son has problems, educational learning problems, and should he therefore go to a place like yeshiva that I suggested, I have to tell you the truth now. I'm not a good Talmud. He told me that, and I did it anyway. I'm happy I did it. I was right. But his advice was simply that he was able to think on the level of the person in front of him or of the person's son in front of him. It was the most natural thing in the world for him to do that. It involves a huge wideness of perspective. Most of us, anyone, can be a gadol, then your narrow world is a gadol, and if you're one of us, so your narrow world is your narrow world. His world was not narrow in any sense. The whole panoply of human existence, I think he claimed because of the literature he read, that's what opened his eyes to these sorts of things. But it was open to him without even thinking. He brought him case A, and he identified with case A. It had to do with things of halacha. I once went to speak to him. I have a theory which I've been developing for some 20, 30 years concerning, I'm not going to describe it now, concerning reproductive technology. And in the last 30 years, it's been a tremendous, amazing, incredible revolution. It's unimaginable. It's unimaginable enough that there's nothing in Chazal to look for to find out what our actual thoughts should be. That's what he means by revolution. The idea that you can produce children through means that literally do not involve people. Something that cells and test tubes, etc. And I have a negative opinion, which I try to develop, but I have no view on the color. Since I'll not imagine. There's nothing to even look for. So it's a little agada, it's a little hashkafa. I went to talk to him, and I wanted to convince him. And so I don't know if he really could. He said, oh, you know, that could be. He said, but so what? How can you tell what you're claiming? How could you possibly tell it to a couple? If I had a Gemara that said it's asa, so you tell it to a couple and they would suffer. That's okay. Halacha is halacha. But I should come with my philosophic feelings about the importance of the personal aspect of producing human life in a family. I would say that to a couple that has no children. He said, well, how could you even imagine you could say something like that? Now, this is a good despite story. Here's a man whom halacha, strict halacha, was the be-all, end-all, beginning-all of everything. But when you have to apply it to people, you have to apply it to people. And so, if it's true, it's true. And he didn't. He really, he wasn't the kind of person who would bend what he thought was clearly true when somebody cried. That kind of story is not true. But to come with theories of philosophy as convincing that they might be, I'm not sure he's convinced, but he said, even if I was convinced, there's no way that you can impose that on somebody who is not interested in philosophy, but interested in his own personal suffering. What's the connection? And that's the explanation why he disagreed but admired. The hesped he gave for Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he mentioned as an example of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's psak on hearing aids. And he said that he's not sure it's correct. He's not sure that it is mutter to wear a hearing aid on Shabbos. You're basically using a microphone, you're not talking into a microphone, but you're providing a microphone for somebody else. But when he went to speak to Shlomo Zalman about it, Shlomo Zalman said, you think we can leave people for 24 hours in darkness and silence? How can you allow that? We're going to have to find a way to be matter people. You cannot leave somebody in deafness for 24 hours. So Lichtenstein told this story as part of the Shevach for Rav Shlomo Zalman, although I think he might have been mentioned in the Hesped, I surely know it's true, but he didn't necessarily agree with the psak. He might have even agreed to apply the consideration, but he tremendously admired the consideration. That's why for Shlomo Zalman was the premier posek in Eretz Yisrael. I will not mention the people he thought were not premier posek in Eretz Yisrael, but it's because they didn't have the same midah in any sense. And a personal story, which I would know, again, it's something which didn't amaze me. It amazed others, and I know how amazing it is. I got so used to the fact that he does things like this. Once went to a wedding, a close friend of mine, my mother-in-law at the time was 99 years old. She died at 103. She was 99 years old. Simple woman, not a great intellectual. She had nothing to talk about. I spoke to her once or twice in my house. She lived in Etzisar for the last 15 years of her life. And this was where she was invited as well, because we knew the family on both sides. And he was invited because he was coming in yeshiva. And there was dancing, so people got up to dance. I got up to dance, my wife got up to dance. My mother-in-law at 99 had stopped dancing. And she was sitting at the table. We came back, Lichtenstein is sitting with this woman discussing, I have no idea what. I mean, I can imagine a few things. She had a very interesting life. She was the only person I know of even close to that age who was born in America. But I know because she was born in Europe. She was born in America on a farm. So you could ask her interesting questions. And he was sitting chatting her up because, frankly, the next oldest person in the room was 25 years younger than her. And I don't think he had recognized her. This was somebody who wasn't doing anything. So he went to talk, but he found what to talk to her about in his wide range of experience, and he found something. And despite here begins, yes, despite the fact that he was an intellectual, we discussed philosophy and halacha. So with that, we discussed her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. She didn't have any great-grandchildren. And so I thought it was, to me it was obvious, but Yom Tabori was there. Do you see what's happening? So again, why am I bringing this story? There's nobody in this room who is incapable, who will need a tremendous change in his abilities, his spiritual abilities, to know that when you see an old lady alone, you might walk over and say hello and ask how she's enjoying the wedding. But it's an act of godliness. It's an act of godliness because we did it every time. We did it automatically. And because that's Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem is to take care of the people around you. Others told you to teach to talk to people, try to understand life better. A, B, C, D, and F. You need a certain measure, a great measure, of sensitivity. Understand what does sensitivity mean. You look at each person through their own eyes. You see somebody sitting alone, you look through their eyes, you realize that they're alone. Being alone is something which requires some sort of people. And finally, I'd like to mention a few points in terms of what in this panoply of activities is important. Because again, the goals are something which we can all adopt. The first thing that comes to my mind, I spent 50 years, more or less the whole time, 3 years when we were separated, I first came to Israel, 4 years. I spent 50 years with Rav Lichtenstein. First thing, what is the goal? What is my Avodas Hashem directed to? First thing is Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is a very important thing. 40 years he was Rosh Yeshiva Harav Tzion. Anybody who knows the world of yeshiva, so for that matter, any organization, knows that my organization needs to be developed, which means that someone else's organization, there's a competition involved. Recruitment of Talmidim is a fact, is brutal. There's just so many Talmidim out there, and you want to get the best ones for your yeshiva. So that's financial considerations. Aside from recruitment, is also you build up yeshiva because you want yeshiva to be great, and you have it's a real goal. You know yeshiva does a good thing, so you want it to be great. Rav Lichtenstein, despite his belief and his commitment to Yeshivat Harav Tzion, did not work for Yeshivat Harav Tzion. I didn't hear him say this, but it was obvious. You know, it's true. He worked for Klal Yisrael. He either worked for Kodesh Baruch Hu, he worked for Klal Yisrael. He really believed that Yeshiva had to go, but if someone else could do it, then he could do it too. And therefore, when one of the rabbis in Yeshiva was called to found another yeshiva, so the yeshiva provided with him with all the wherewithal to do that. Yeshivat Yerucham is a yeshivat bat of Yeshivat Harav Tzion, despite the fact, I think he knew at the time, and I'm sure we knew 2 or 3 years later, they stole some of our best talmid. Because it was a very good yeshiva. It was a very good yeshiva because they had the advice of Lichtenstein and the aide, and Rav Tal, and other people in Yeshivat Harav Tzion in family. One of the most common evils of Jewish communal life is wonderful people who are committed to a goal and therefore work in a certain organization, in a certain context, and at some point become more committed to the organization than they are to the original goal. The corporate loyalty of good people who are fighting hard. So Lichtenstein, because his thing was Avodas Hashem, prevented him from ever coming close to making that mistake. Daniel Schreiber actually went to him and asked him, I'm going now to give, for my first time, Bechinas to Talmidim, what advice do you have? So he told him, advice, do whatever you want, think of how to do it. I'll give you just one piece of advice, do not denigrate any other yeshiva. And I think Rav Schreiber understood it, that it's us to denigrate a Makom Torah. I don't think that's also the reason. I don't think that was the main reason. What he meant was, your job is not to build ourselves on someone else's cheshbon. That God will figure out how to do. Your job is to get talmidim because we have something to offer. And a second point, that was important, and that is tznius. Many people mention modesty, and he was an amazingly modest person. We very often misinterpret what modesty means. I never asked Rav Lichtenstein, did you think you are the God? Question which you can't actually ask, right? But I am not willing to answer that if I had asked him, he would have said no. Late in his life, he once more or less told me that the answer is yes. It came out accidentally. He recognized his work. He definitely told me that he was the best talmid in Chaim Berlin by far when he was there. That he told me explicitly one time. Late in his life, and in his early he would have said something. But that doesn't change his modesty. Modesty wasn't about, do you think this is true or that is true? It's what do you demand for yourself? What do you expect other people to give you? It never occurred to him. The stories I've told you that somebody would stand and give him a seat. It was very painful to do that. There's a very famous story I heard from one of my teachers in high school. About the shiur in Mir. I still admit that when I was too young to ask who it was. When Yucham got up and said once, he said, when I come into a room and everybody stands up, it's very painful. But I know that it'll be much more painful if they didn't stand. For Lichtenstein, it wasn't that he thought the proper mitzvah not to allow people to stand up to him. He really would be surprised. No deal. It wasn't anything special that he expected, normal, under normal circumstances. And he knew that he was a Rosh Yeshiva. He knew he wasn't a Rosh Yeshiva. He knew the Yeshiva had certain rules. It just wasn't part of, it was the modesty of expectation, the modesty of demand, the modesty of what's my place. When you walk into a room, I have to tell you an experience. I'm nowhere near that level, but I have a different orientation. Being in England has a very proper attitude towards Rabbanim. I commend you on that attitude. So I'm a guest rabbi here, and I go to shul. My first day that I'm here, I went to Mincha in a shul that doesn't know who I am. Sachachav Stiebel on Golders Green Road Avenue, whatever it's called. And someone says, this is Rabbi Bick. I have no idea who Rabbi Bick was. He says, come sit by Mizrach. So I've never in my life sat on Mizrach, and if without any modesty whatsoever, I just don't think I can sit over there. So I said no. And they questioned me this and that, so I used to sit in the first row. So that was some sort of aberration of Chavedim, Chassidim. They have this thing, they have to show all sorts of cover. And then I went to daven in a different shul, in there. And so the rabbi says to me, I sit where I normally would sit. I didn't sit in the back row. I'm not a modest person. I sat in the third row. He said, no, you have to sit up front. So the rabbi says, it was rabbis, that's why rabbis handle other rabbis. I walk in this morning, I was there less than 30 seconds, and the gabbai comes over and he says to me, you have to sit in the front row. So it is painful for me, but I'm not. It's painful for me because I really don't. I mean, it's really silly. There's no reason why I should be sitting there. I came to speak about Rav Lichtenstein. So I commend the English on their insistence on people sitting in the front row. Rav Lichtenstein, it really wouldn't occur to him that that's where he should be sitting. I mean, there's a very nice seat. He used to daven in Yerushalayim, in different yeshivas, in places in his neighborhood. He was not a little above, nothing special. And he sat wherever there was a corner. It was a good place to sit. It's a tznius of halichot. A tznius that means if I have something to say, if I have a shiur to give, I'll give the shiur. And I think Rav Lichtenstein knew and accepted, and wasn't even upset about the fact that very often in the room, he knew more than anybody else, and therefore he should give the shiur. This I never participated in, but he had meetings with other Rosh Yeshiva, the meetings with Rosh Yeshiva, the Guru Yeshivot is there, all Rosh Yeshiva, he's head and shoulders over most of them, and all of them. And therefore, when they used to argue, he used to say, this is not stubborn, this is what I think is true, and he had no problems to argue with people who were considered to be very, very famous. But, because the Torah was real. But, if you don't have anything to say, so there's no reason to say. Something which related to one of the stories told here, but I was interested to hear the opposite. Ron said that Lichtenstein came to him after the Joshua and simply said, thank you, and didn't criticize anything you had said, correct what you said. So that's very interesting because Lichtenstein had been correcting everything I said. Lichtenstein used to sit, we used to have once a year in Yeshiva on Hanukkah, we have these Yemei Iyun. We take off a couple of hours, we invite guests, talk about a topic, not a usual yeshiva topic, widen the perspective of the Talmudim. He used to come to every single lecture, every single one. And he sat there with the pad, and he's writing the whole time. And I know it's coming, I'm saying, how does he do that? This poor guy came and gave a speech, a lecture, a professor. He gave a speech, he said some nice ideas, you listen, it's fine. He doesn't need to have it taken apart line by line. But Buddhism gets him and says, you said this thing, it's an interesting point, but it's contradicted by this, and this one, that's not. He was given the guy respect. He said something, and I'm going to point out where you went wrong. And it was very often a long list, and she got stopped in that process. This poor fellow, he didn't know where he was coming. He thought he was coming to speak the country from Eden. He can sell anything he wants, speak a little Machshava, a little Agada, a little Hasidus. And the Buddha says, it's nice that you quoted the Baal Tanya, but the Baal Tanya said the opposite two pages later. And sometimes it was in Minushi, he did it with a smile. On his 70th birthday, right? You were the MC, His 70th birthday, that was 12 years ago. So in Yeshiva, we made a birthday party for him. They asked myself and Rabbi Taboy, who were two people who knew him the longest, to speak about it. Taboy told the story, which was repeated many times, how when he was 8 years old, he heard it from his father. He was 8 or 9 years old. He used to come to go to sleep and turn off the lights. He had a flashlight. He would turn the flashlight under the covers to learn. So the voice said he used to learn the Shnayos. So the Lichtenstein says, I tell you the truth, the story is true, but it wasn't the Shnayos. I was learning Tanakh. And I tell the story, which I'm sure is true. It's burned into my heart. The story I told before about Alei Tzion. Lichtenstein says, it wasn't exactly the way Rabbi Bick told the story. He starts correcting me little things. I don't accept it. He's wrong. I'm not. But it was so important to correct everything that you said. It's amazing. And everything that you said. That wasn't done to guide. It wasn't because I'm right to tell you that. It was a service. It was a service to the people. People had heard a story. There's a detail wrong. Who knows what you quote later on. We all know how all histories work. Inadvertently, you can't help yourself making up things, and etc. 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 My final point: was the man ideological? Was he a sweet person? No. Was he ideological? Yes. I said Avodas Hashem was his ideology. He had a Tzionist ideology. He had a Talmud Torah ideology. Had very strong ideologies. When are ideologies important? So, for instance, learning Torah as an ideology. Yes, it's very important. Because of that ideology, you cut off a day at the beginning of the Chodesh, a day at the end of the Chodesh. There was a discussion in Yeshivas. There's a custom, unfortunate custom, in Israel. Before elections, Yeshivas allow the Talmidim to go and canvass, get people out to elections, because elections are Kodesh. You get one more seat, two more seats, who knows, you can say Torah. Shabbat Harav Aharon does not allow Talmidim who are learning Torah to take off and to save Am Yisrael by getting 3 more people to vote for their party. Politics is not by the Shiva. That's ideology. Chesed was ideology. The article he wrote about the Hesed called Torah Chesed. Why do you do chesed. Why do you have to go to the army? Because to learn Torah without chesed is not to learn Torah. And therefore, we have to do everything to be yell and scream about these things. Where is there no specified theology? So one is party politics. This was called a number of times to intervene. It had to do with Mizrahi and because he identified with Mizrahi, but he wasn't. The ideology is Laman Hashem. If you have an ideology that says this is what we need and therefore this is your wrong or I'm right, that is totally divorced from his understanding. I think the only ideology that counts is the only ideology that counts is Lahagdol Torah Ula Harabiyah. And finally, above everything else, this is so clear to everybody knew him. Shiur Kol Masecha L'Shem Shamayim. Kol Masecha L'Shem Shamayim. This indeed, on a moral basis, is something which I recommend to everybody. The extent to which it was true of him is indeed extraordinary. The man had no nikiyot ishiyot, no personal interest to distort what he was saying, even in the slightest. I mentioned this once last year at the stadium, that there was once a time, more than once a time, when we would have pronouncements on public issues, important public issues, Israeli political issues, peace, war, etc., etc. And many Rabbanim disagreed. And I remember once saying to myself, he's wrong. Perhaps the other Rabbanim are right. It's a very fine issue, and it's very difficult to know himself. Let's say it's very, very difficult to know. And I said to myself then, and I say it now, I would rather be wrong with Rav Lichtenstein than be right with the other Rabbanim, and not because I'm a chas v'shalom. So not, as I pointed out before, I didn't know his father was a chas. But because I don't know the right answer, but I know that his answer was given without any nigiyot ishiyot and any personal interest that could possibly be stolen. That doesn't mean he had to be right. You have to be a navi to be perfectly right. But at least it meant that that answer was a pure answer. If we're wrong, could be wrong. I'd rather be wrong with him than be right with people who I don't trust 100% how they got to the decisions. I'll call the Shem Shemayim. So this is something which I would suggest and advise as an aspiration. Always try to say what I'm doing is the Shem Shemayim, with the understanding that Shem Shemayim is a very wide concept. It can include many things. It doesn't include twiddling one's tongue, but it does include studying something. It does include working in this area, working in that area, if it's the Shem Shemayim, and to try it all the time to indeed purify ourselves. The idea should be back the Shem Shemayim and nothing else. I think that it doesn't require an immense effort. It simply requires a decision that a person, everyone can say that I dedicate myself to try to call my aside Hashem Shamayim. Everything I do should be part of my avodas Hashem, so that you don't have to be an extraordinary gadol like the Baal was. You don't have to struggle with immense difficulties. You simply have to say that this is my orientation. I'm here, and I want to do this. Occasionally you'll fail because you have the Eitzah and you may have done something without it being Hashem Shamayim. But that we should understand that we're not doing occasional mitzvahs within our larger life, that our lives exist in order to be a better Oved Hashem. Hashem should be Mekudash Al Yadeinu Ba'olam Hazeh. That's something which I think we can learn from him, from his greatness, each of us on our own level, and apply. And if we do that, the world will be indeed a much better world, and our own world will be a much better world of sport.
On behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank Rav Bick for a very analytical assessment of Rav Aharon's life and Rav Aharon's contribution, and for sharing with us those very inspirational ideas and thoughts, and really a message how we can take Rav Aharon's legacy a little bit further with us. I just want to add something to a story that Rabbi Kantorovich shared with us about you were obviously a braver man than I, always. In terms of asking Rav Aharon for a letter of recommendation when you applied for a job, I doubtfully didn't ask him to be a rabbi. That's because when I was looking for my first position, one of our Chaverim had experienced a few weeks previously. He'd asked Rav Aharon, he put Rav Aharon down as a reference. Rav Aharon called him up over in the Beit Medrash, wanted to speak to him. He said, certain institution has come to me You put me down as a reference. I don't think you're up to the job. Do you want me to tell them that, or should I just ignore their letter? And that was a wonderful example of Rav Aharon's commitment to MF. We tend to think that a person asks for a letter of recommendation, we'll write something nice about them, they'll work it out themselves, whatever. We haven't got such a responsibility. Rav Aharon's commitment to truth there was, I'm happy to write and tell them that you're not up to the job, if that's what you want me to do, or I'll just ignore the letter. And that's a very powerful message that I take.
That for me.
That I take it wasn't you. There's an important message and lesson. That commitment that one must have to MF. So I'd like to thank Chief Rabbi in his absence for gracing this evening's event. Rav Bick for his very insightful comments this evening. Also Rav Ezra Bick for his inspiring insights into Rav Aharon's Hitnahut, and Rabbi Kantorovich for his involvement as well. Thank you very much.
We spoke about the movies. So, 25 years ago, Rav Lichtenstein went to a movie with his wife. It was Amadeus. And then, happened two things. One thing, we sat together once, Kohen and Elise with Tova and him, and we spoke about movies and this, and she said, before we got married, he promised me, that every week we'll go to a movie. Well, I understand that he doesn't go with me, but at least that he remembered that he promised me. So this she said. And then a student came to me, Shiur Aleph, and asked me, how is it the Rosh Yeshiva goes to a movie? How can it be? I didn't go to movies once a year. So I went to the Rav Lichtenstein. I told him, look, this student, I told him he wanted to know how is it that the Rosh Yeshiva goes to a movie. He said, okay, tell him to come to me. I went to him and told him, he almost fainted. I went to Rav Lichtenstein. I told him, look, he won't come to the Rav. He said, okay, I'll go to him. He went to him. And he gave him the whole, and then this student came to me, he wanted to kill me. He told me, he asked me, everything we have in our Yahadut, in the books, why do we need to go to the movie? So he told him, the movie gives us the questions, shows us all the problems in the world. The answers you get in our books. It was very interesting. So, very interesting to see something like this. And I have to tell you one thing, that I'm speaking here, it's also thanks to Rav Lichtenstein. Not because I'm speaking on him, but because when I was in Shiur Dalet, I was sure I'm going to be a doctor. And he called me to his room and spoke for a quarter of an hour how important it is to be a doctor. מקצוע של חסד רפואה. And after a quarter of an hour he said, אבל. In case you have to stay with you, so thanks to him.
Go ahead, thank you. Minchas at 7:30 today.
What is this? What is this? Because what? What are you doing?